Hi, and welcome to another daily devotion. Today, going to continue James chapter 5 and from verse 10 and verse 11. Let me read, "My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You have heard of the perseverance of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful." And so yesterday, or the last few days, been speaking on the subject of not justifying ourselves, maintaining our godly character and wisdom, and to not want to justify ourselves by maintaining patience, and that during that enduring, to make sure that we guard our hearts, that we don't let bitterness in. And so now an example is given. It's saying, now consider the prophets, for example. So what it's saying here is that, the people, the scriptures are showing us that this is possible because the prophets of old did this. They accomplished this, and yet they were in a different dispensation of time. And, we now in grace, Christ in us, our hope of glory. And I believe that of all times, we live in a much better covenant, without a doubt. But it's saying here, "My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience." So in other words, it's saying, when you set out to do the work of God and speak for God and do everything that God's called you to do, not everybody is going to celebrate your ministry or what you stand for, or what you believe in. And so how do we respond then when people come against you and say, "Oh, you're one of these born-again Christians," or in the workplace that, "Oh, you're more holy than thou" sort of person? We don't need to respond to that. The reality is we need to be wise in how we communicate the oracles of God, but we don't compromise on the stand that we have in God. And so, the example here is to take, for example, the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord, and as an example of the suffering and patience. And so these guys, they went through suffering, but through patience they endured. And it's the same principle, James chapter 1, let patience have its perfect work. It does have its perfect work. And so no matter what people may do, our focus is not on what is being said. Our focus is not against the unfair treatment. Our focus is on guarding our hearts and focusing on what God has called us to do and who He's called us to be, and for us to continue to operate in the wisdom of God and the ways of God, and God will establish us. We need to guard our hearts. These prophets, they were murdered, many of them murdered, stoned, and what was their evil work that they did? They didn't do anything wrong. They were speaking the oracles of God. And so we see a prime example of the wisdom of this earth, which is earthly, sensual, and demonic, rising up and coming against the wisdom of God. We see it again with a prime example with Cain and Abel. And we see that Cain, he operated in a very earthly wisdom. It was sensual and it was demonic. And he came against his brother Abel because his works were righteous. And so, there's a real difference of heart attitude. And so today, let's consider the prophets that, we have an example that they endured, they continued, they went through very difficult times, and many of them spoke knowing that they were going to be executed, but they managed to still endure faithfully to carry out the mission that God had placed on their heart to do. And so why don't we continue this tomorrow, and join with me tomorrow, because I think there's a little bit more. Can I just say this as I close, that you don't have to justify yourself. Whatever people have done to you, the judge stands at the door and he's watching and he knows. Our part is to make sure we don't leave our post. Keep doing what God has shown you to do, and do it with all your might. Amen. God knows everything and God sees everything, and God is the righteous judge. Amen. So until then, I'll be blessed, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.